Welcome back to the Unnamed History Show, guys. I know I kind of have a boring background right now, and I don't know really how the lighting and sound quality is, but all I can really say for that is I'm in a college dorm, and this is probably the best it's going to get until I finish my semester here. I know that Xavier also gave me a shout out on his most recent video, so if any of y'all are from his channel, welcome, and I hope that you enjoy what you see and you stick around. That being said, today we are doing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Before I get 1,000 comments in the future asking me to do the Assassin's Creed series, because it seems obvious if I'm reviewing games and movies to do the games that focus largely on history, I figured I like the Assassin's Creed games. I'll just go ahead and get them out of the way now. With that being said, I will be doing them individually, obviously, because that just do the game's justice, and I don't want to upload a 4-hour video either of all the Assassin's Creed games put together. Also, I do want to point out I'm not going to be doing Chronicles because there isn't really enough content there because the games are 2.5D to make a video on. As for the other ones, I will be going from Odyssey to Syndicate. And once I finish Syndicate, I'll do Valhalla, and then if another Assassin's Creed game comes out, I'll do that one, and so on. But for right now, it's just going to be Odyssey to Syndicate, and then whenever I have the money to get Valhalla, I'll do that after Syndicate. I'm not going to be talking too much about the gameplay in these videos because this series is about focusing on the historical accuracy of the games, not about how fun they are. However, once I get through the whole franchise, I will be doing a tier list where I rank which ones are historically accurate over the other games, as well as where I would rank them gameplay based as well, just for fun. With that being said, let's get into it. Now, ironically, whenever I did my 300 video, I wasn't immediately planning to do Assassin's Creed Odyssey afterwards, but it kind of works out that both of them are right back to each other and both set in Greece. I'm not going to be talking about every single Greek god and goddess that are in these games because Greek mythology is a cluster, and that'll be a whole video on its own. However, I will be going through the mythological creatures that are in the game, including the Minotaur, Medusa, Sphinx, and the 3 Cyclops. As for the setting, Assassin's Creed Odyssey takes place in Greece during the Peloponnesian Wars, which is 432 before Common Era to 404 before Common Era. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey focuses mainly on 431 to 422. For those of you that don't know how before Common Era works, it's just like negative numbers. Whenever the number is bigger, that means it is further back from us. So just think of it as negative 431 to negative 422. Now, when most people hear of Greek Odyssey, they obviously think of the epic poem by Homer. However, this deals with the fall of the Troy and the Trojan War, so try not to get confused, because the Trojan War was about 300 years prior to any of the events in this game or the Peloponnesian Wars. Now, the Assassin's Creed's entire concept is creating fictional characters in real and historical setting, which is the whole reason I'm doing this subseries. Odyssey, on the other hand, is very unique in which it has a privilege in being historically accurate without being historically accurate. Makes sense, right? Let me back up and explain. The Greek period saw an explosion of plays and stories everywhere. In order to gain an audience, writers would constantly be trying to come up with ideas while weaving in historical events or characters into them. This gives Odyssey the freedom to use these historical characters as pawns and props in their story while still giving the presentation of a possible Greek play. For example, Cleo, who we will discuss later, is a real historical figure who's part of the antagonist group of the game. This is something you might see in a real Greek play. Using historical figures as an antagonist or side character in order to push this story subtly gives the writer's opinion on said historical figure as well. If you like a politician, you aren't going to write about them as a warmongering murderer, but you might write their opponent in that way, while making the historical figure you like being the diplomatic person in the story. PC Games actually wanted to know more about this, and so they interviewed a professor about Assassin's Creed Odyssey and explained their findings by saying, "With Assassin's Creed Odyssey, we see Ubisoft really stretching its muscles in two different departments, those that allow for gorgeous depiction of the story that sticks to the facts, and those that express the studio's creativity in telling its own stories within that setting. It's not unlike the Greek playwrights who told tales of heroes thousands of years ago, weaving embellishment into their tellings of the truth, upping the entertainment for the listener." And then the professor they interviewed said, "It's about a sense of freedom. Aristotle said the Greeks love it when the tragedy playwrights make up a story, so the Greeks were constantly changing their stories. The Athenian audience would love when the plays were new, so it's almost a Greek tradition to constantly make changes. It's hard to make them completely new, like make the Trojans beat the Greeks in the Trojan War, but you still have the freedom in how to tell the story." In order to further set the stage, let's give some background information on the conflict going at hand, which was the Peloponnesian Wars, as I described before. I thought you said that Athens and Sparta were working together before. Well, yes, Athens and Sparta did team up during the Persian Wars, but only because it was absolutely necessary. While it seems cliche, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend idea. The same idea can be applied to Britain and France being rival superpowers from the creation of their nations up until about the start of World War I in order to defeat Germany. Sparta and Athens had their disputes before, but not to this scale. For starters, the two had two completely different forms of government. Athens had a direct democracy, meaning everything was voted by all male citizens, and not by representatives or a higher ruler. That being said, Pericles is often seen as the ruler of Athens and is referred to by Thucydides, an Athenian historian, as the first citizen of Athens. This is because Pericles was a politician that created his influence through art, writing, philosophy, and was also the general of the Peloponnesian Wars. Sparta, on the other hand, had a clear chain of power. There were the elders who had power above all and acted as sort of a judiciary branch, dictating punishment for crimes. Below them were the kings and royalty, which acted as the executive branch, holding the most land and commanding the military. Then came the Apollo, which acted as a legislative branch and consisted of a national assembly that denied or authorized making laws. Now, I don't want to give you the wrong idea and make it sound like the United States. Although each of these are divided into seemingly a legislative, executive, and judicial branch, it is nothing like what we see now. Each group had power over the other. There were no checks and balances as we see. It was a straight line of who had control over who. Athens and Sparta were constantly having pissing matches with each other, arguing over who had the stronger military. Athens had the advantage at sea, making ships from strong materials found in their mines, as I discussed a little bit in my 300 video, and Sparta had the advantage on land, born to be soldiers and having superior military tactics, which again I mentioned in my 300 video. It was only a matter of time before they actually tested their bark versus bite on each other to see who truly had the strongest military. Now to get started on the game. Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Origins implemented a Discovery Tour mode to explore historical locations and characters. It has hundreds upon hundreds of historical locations that exploring every single one would take hours. Instead, I'm going to go into detail on what I think about the Discovery Tour when I compare all the games together in that tier list I described earlier. And for right now, we're just going to focus on characters and locations that appear in the main story in order to keep this video short. I'll put in the description this website of a player that tried to map every historical location in the game for you to explore if you so desire. let's get started on characters. For starters, Cassandra would not have had the role she has in these games. As I explained in 300, males were fighters while females generally stayed at home. Cassandra also generally has the same gameplay as Alexio, so it doesn't really matter. So the only purpose of her being there is just for some PR for Ubisoft in order for you to play as either gender. For this part of the video, I broke down and wrote a little bit about each location and character that was in Assassin's Creed that was also significant in the Peloponnesian War or times related. A lot of locations are just hotspots for battles, so there isn't much else to say about them. So the list of locations I have is a little limited, but I tried to include as much as I could.
It's a bird! It's not a plane because they weren't invented yet! It's Captain Triangle, here to save the day with his mathematics!
Everybody knows Pythagoras, but the only way we really know about him is because of the formula that we all had dumped down our throats during Algebra 1. Other than that, people don't really know that much about him. Pythagoras died years before the Peloponnesian War, but is seen in Atlantis being kept alive by the staff of Hermes. When I first played this game, I actually loved this twist because there's a lot of background information that kind of connect these puzzle pieces together. First thing being is Pythagoras acted as sort of a teacher role to Plato, who Plato was the first one who wrote about Atlantis. So it makes sense that Pythagoras could have spent time there if it really existed and told stories to Plato that then wrote about the city. The second thing is about him still being alive. While he was a mathematician and a man of science, Pythagoras constantly talked about his belief in immortality or reincarnation, which could also be the origins of Plato's theory again that we don't learn, but instead we remember parts of our brain we previously used in another life. Historians also debate whether or not that Pythagoras was a pescatarian or not, meaning that he ate fish but not meat. If he was, then that could be even more information to tie him to an Atlantis story. However, the game's twist also claims Pythagoras is the father of the main character. But this would be impossible because Pythagoras held abstinence very highly in his life. And we all know that in order to become a father, you're not going to be abstinent. As for Atlantis itself, there are many myths about it, but the root generally stays the same, which is that it was a highly intelligent first civilization that was buried or destroyed during an eruption at Thera, which holds up in the game because this is where you find it on the map.
So I forgot to say this in the video, but I'll give Pythagoras a 5 out of 10 because obviously he wasn't alive at the time, but if he was, who knows, maybe he's hiding out in Atlantis somewhere.
Megaris is described as the center of war in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Elpenor even calls it the rope the war is tugging on. This is because the Megarian Decree is one of the main causes of the war. The Megarian Decree was similar to an embargo on Megaris ensued by Athens. We see this in the game as well because when approaching Megaris in the first quest, the player is stopped by an Athenian blockade. The decree angered Sparta because it was weakening Megaris' economy. When Athens refused to move the decree, war ensued, and Megaris obviously sided with Sparta because they wanted to be able to trade again. Sparta is actually the capital of a much bigger area, Laconia. When we first arrive in Laconia, a text appears saying, "Laconia, the birthplace of warriors." I really like this subtitle because the area was obviously known for producing the strongest military soldiers. Other than that side note, there isn't much to say about Sparta or Laconia that A, you wouldn't already know, or B, I haven't talked about in 300. Elpenor is one of the first characters we are introduced to. Now, Elpenor is a character in Homer's Odyssey, but again, this occurred much closer to the Trojan War, which was around 1260 BC. So there was no way Elpenor would be walking around during this time about 800 years later. However, in the Odyssey, as in Homer's Odyssey, Elpenor is the first person Odysseus meets in Hades. After Elpenor died from being drunk and falling off the roof, no joke, that's literally how he died, he begs Odysseus in the afterlife to return his body and give him a proper burial that he hadn't received. In a DLC in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you meet him in Tartarus, and you have the choice to spare him or leave him in Tartarus with Hades. For Elpenor, kind of the same thing as Pythagoras. He wasn't alive at the time, but I do like their connections that they put in there. So, 5 out of 10. In Phokis, we meet Herodotos, which honestly is my favorite Greek name to say. Herodotos. 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 Anyway, I'm getting off topic. As you progress through the story, you see Herodotos at every significant event and quest in the time period, such as the Olympics and the plague that Hippocrates is dealing with. This makes perfect sense because Herodotus is seen as the father of history. He was one of the first people in history to start creating primary sources for others to research. With that being said, historians agree that what he writes down or says should still be taken with a grain of salt. You see, his accounts are reliable, but only to a point, because again, he had to make it interesting in order for people to read it. One such example is when he describes Babylon with such detail on its beauty, claiming that it has over 100 gates. How many did it really have? 8. He said that 8 gates equaled 100. However, because he traveled frequently, he didn't have much bias towards any side of the war in his writings, which would normally be a problem in any other primary source. If you read a primary source about either side of the war, numbers are going to be changed in either way to make the battle seem more bloody or more heroic. One such thing I noticed, however, in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is that because Herodotos is a side character, he tends to keep to himself is kind of reserved and doesn't say many words unless he's around Barnabas, which is another side character. In reality, Herodotos was always trying to spread his work and what he had been writing, and he had large audiences listening to his testimonies of events. He also more or less had sort of an ego going. He wrote about what he felt was important. If something wasn't worth his time, he didn't write about it. And whenever he got criticism that people didn't understand what he was writing, he would essentially respond with the Greek version of, "That sound like a you problem, dog." There isn't much to say about Leonidas. They depict him dying at the Battle of Thermopylae, which is clearly what happened. There isn't much to say or anything I could have likely even said that I haven't said already in 300, because that is about the Battle of Thermopylae in full. On a very short side note though, I will say that I much prefer Odyssey's portrayal of Xerxes with his beard over the bald man in 300. 300. What were you thinking? Leonidas, we'll just give him an even 7 out of 10. There isn't much there to really go either way on. When we first enter Athens, our character observes what can best be described as a debate. Athens was the first democracy, so the power was given to whoever people supported the most. Cleon was much more of an offensive versus defensive politician. Britannica says he became leader of the Athenian democracy in 429 after the death of his political enemy Pericles. In the Peloponnesian War, he strongly advocated an offensive strategy. When Mytilene, which had revolted against Athens, fell in 427, Cleon proposed that all its citizens be put to death and the women and children enslaved. Livius also says something similar, stating, "The historian Thucydides, who belonged to an old noble family, despised Cleon and called him the most violent among Athenian citizens. In the surviving comedies of Aristophanes, the new politician is only represented in a state of anger, and when he speaks, his voice sounds like a squalled pig. Cleon and Pericles are seen on a stage when we first enter Athens, arguing about the city's fate, and Cleon seems to be ramping up the crowd. The people saw their homes being attacked in the war and felt there needed to be more action. Cleon played directly into that combination in anger and fear and of certainty in their leader, just as described before. After the debate, Herodotus even makes a comment to our characters saying, "This is Athens. If you want something, sometimes you have to play a role." He took power of Athens after Pericles died of sickness. In this game, you also gain his trust by completing missions to weaken Spartan power. However, towards the end of the game, you have to kill him because he ends up being part of the artificial antagonist in the game's plot, the cult of Cosmos. For Cleon, I'll give a 8 out of 10. Because it really shows his offensive and non-diplomatic manner in the game. As for Pericles, we'll also give him an 8 out of 10, because we don't see him much in the game because he's dying from illness, as said before, but the moments we do see him are highly accurate. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there is a quest where you must save Phidias from being taken to a trial, which is actually a cover-up for his murder. When you meet him, he is also chiseling into a rock. This is one of the many things that Assassin's Creed Odyssey actually nails the nail perfect on. Phidias was a Greek sculptor and actually created the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Phidias had sort of a friendship with Pericles, and enemies of Pericles wanted to be rid of Phidias. They put him on trial for stealing gold and convicted him even though there was no real proof that he did it. He then was, quote, taken off to prison where he died of illness, although according to some writers, Pericles' enemies arranged for him to die of poisoning in order to discredit Pericles. For Phidias, for the first time ever, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10. Phidias is spot on with how he is in real life. Everybody knows Socrates, just like I said about Pythagoras. He's exactly the same in the game as the stories you've heard of him depicted. He's the guy that answers a question with the question, ponders life's greatest mysteries, and likes to give you advice on morality. He is also a mentor to Alcibiades, who most don't know about, but whom we'll talk about now. Socrates, I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. They kind of just gave him the stereotypical Socrates that you always see, and he stays in Athens the entire time. While Alcibiades' depiction in Assassin's Creed Odyssey seems to be humorous, it is actually a very accurate depiction of the character. Alcibiades in the game is a guy that likes to bang a lot. In real life, he's a guy that likes to bang a lot.
My man.
To be more detailed, he was a philosopher with a very loose sense of morals. He was very flamboyant and gave his love to as many people as he could. He was practically forced to become a student under Socrates by the community in hope that Socrates could make him more mature, and Socrates agreed. Alcibiades also became a general in the Peloponnesian Wars because he was still seen as intelligent, even with all things considered. However, with his loose morals as mentioned before, he helped strategize for both sides, basically bandwagoning whoever was winning. This made him disliked by many people in Athens later in his life because he was obviously seen as a traitor of sorts. They don't show this part much in Odyssey. Instead, him and Socrates just basically stay in Athens the whole time, which I thought was kind of weird. For Alcibiades, I'll give a 6 out of 10. While they do show his, how should I put this, sexuality a lot in the game, they never show him being a general or switching sides on the war or anything like that. So a big chunk of his history is left out of the game. Before, I had talked about how females didn't do that much in ancient Greece. Aspasia was the exception. She was very similar to almost this time period's version of Cleopatra, which was a woman in power who was highly intelligent. She was the wife of Pericles, and with her intellect had influenced many of the philosophers. This is best portrayed in the game when you complete the Pericles Symposium quest. Aspasia is the real host of the party, even though it is Pericles' party, and the attendees are the great minds of the time. Socrates, Alcibiades, and writers like Sophocles are all there at the party. As for Aspasia, I'm going to give a 9 out of 10, because we don't see her much after the Pericles Symposium, but from what we do see of her, it is spot on. You've heard of the Hippocratic Oath. Well, it's named after Hippocrates. He is seen as the father of medicine, as he wrote many books teaching practices of surgery, anatomy, biology, and all-around general medicine. In the games, he gives you many side missions relating to helping the health of the community increase. We meet Hippocrates in Argolis, which is also called the birthplace of medicine in the game. Many people would travel to Argolis in Greece when they did not know how to handle their sickness. It originally started as the Greeks worshipping a deity for help treating them, but as holy work is assisted with herbs and other treatments, it shifted the focus to become more scientific and pharmaceutical. In the game, we see this constant battle between the priest and Hippocrates, because the priests are saying that he is demeaning the gods, ignoring their help, and not praying to them. Instead, Hippocrates does what a doctor should do and actually treats his patients. And as more people saw that Hippocrates' treatments worked, they kept reporting to him and started slacking on their duties to the gods. For Hippocrates, I'm going to give another 10 out of 10. He is perfect, spot on in this game. Now, when anyone says Sphinx, mostly everyone thinks of the one in Egypt. Instead, let's talk about the Greek one. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, these creatures are part of a quest about the relics in Eden and Atlantis. The Sphinx statue in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is located in Thebes and activated with a medallion, just like all the mythical creatures in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This is supported by the mythology that a deity, though thought to possibly be Hera, summoned the Sphinx to Thebes, where it would ravage the city and rest at Thebes for people that passed by. The Sphinx, just like in the game, would give riddles in order to make things interesting with their prey. Anyone that could not answer the riddle was eaten. The most common riddle was one you've probably all heard by now, which was the one about a man aging. What animal is that which in the morning goes on 4 feet, at noon on 2, and in the evening upon 3? A man will crawl, then walk, then use a cane. Therefore, the answer is a man. In the myth, when Oedipus answers the riddle correctly, the Sphinx would either throw herself off a cliff to kill herself, which I don't know how that works because she has wings, or she would actually eat herself instead of Oedipus. The Sphinx had a body of a lion, which some historians debated whether the Sphinx also had female breast on the lion's body, and the wings of an eagle, the tail of a serpent, and a female human head. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they give the creature a more feathered face and chest, leading more into an eagle than with the lion body-wise. Otherwise, the design looks accurate, especially with the tail, which I very much like. The Sphinx then gives you a riddle and you must answer correctly. However, when you defeat her, she just kind of disintegrates into the colors of the Isu, as well as the other mythical creatures, instead of eating herself or killing herself like you see in the myth. For the Sphinx, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 6 out of 10 because the design is a little off and the riddles are accurate, but as for the actual myth of what happens whenever you answer the riddle, it's kind of changed for the gameplay and the story. In Odyssey, we find the Minotaur at Messara in an area called Mino's Legacy. Mino was the king of Crete and son of Zeus. A white bull was sent by Poseidon to Mino for a sacrifice, but Mino instead kept him alive. As punishment, Poseidon made Mino's wife fall in love with the bull and produced an offspring that was half man, half bull. This is actually where the word Minotaur comes from. Mino for the king who was punished, and Tor as in tortoise for bull. The offspring was then sealed in a labyrinth for further punishment. Theseus, a hero of Athens, sets out to kill the Minotaur, following a string he laid to escape the labyrinth. This all comes together in Assassin's Creed when we meet a kid named Ardos who says, "Everyone says Theseus killed the Minotaur, but he's still alive and hungry." And he leads you to the labyrinth holding the beast. Once inside the labyrinth, you see Theseus' string and you follow it until you face the Minotaur. As for the look of Minotaur, I can't really compare it because everything is just described as half man, half bull. Not really much past that. During the cutscene, the Minotaur is seen stumbling and charging into pillars, and does the same during the fight, just kind of stumbling everywhere and being a bumbling idiot. This is because in mythology, on top of everything described before, the Minotaur was obviously seen as not being very intelligent. So it would make sense that when fighting him, he would try to use his horns, but not his actual head. As for the Minotaur, I'm going to give it a solid 9 out of 10. This is very accurate from Assassin's Creed for the labyrinth and for the location of the Minotaur. This is actually my mom's favorite mythical villain, and she also loves Greek mythology, so hopefully she likes this video, even though she probably won't approve of some of the language I may use in this or other videos. I texted her for this video to ask her to describe Medusa for me, and she says, "What do you want me to say about it? I know she was in love with Poseidon, and when he chose another woman, she became evil. When her head got cut off, her blood dripped into the sand, and the Pegasus was born, which is why they both answered to Poseidon." Medusa is a Gorgon, which are described as, quote, winged women with large heads and large staring eyes, and a tusk of swine. Additionally, the Gorgons were also said to have hands made of brass. And there's obviously the head of snakes that Medusa is known for. Medusa was created because Poseidon lusted over her beauty. Athena, as punishment, made her hideous, and anyone that gazed at her was turned to stone. Perseus, no, not Percy, Perseus went on a quest to vanquish Medusa and decapitated with the sword Harpe, with her blood creating the Pegasus. With the mythology explanation out of the way, the game literally threw out all of that, and I mean all of that. In the game, instead, she's sort of a gray creature with the snake head. As for the snake head, the similarities literally end there. They explain the way she was made, in which she picked up the Isu artifact, and Medusa is being reborn by whoever picks up the Isu artifact being turned into Medusa. Just no. She can also teleport when fighting her, because why exactly? And they also give her a sword for some reason. This sword, by the way, after defeating her, turns out to be Harpe, which I described before, which, why would she be using the sword that killed her? Like, why? Why, Assassin's Creed? Why? She's also given the ability to control her stone statues in the game, and she uses sort of these laser beams to turn you into stone instead of just looking you in the eye. But I guess they have to make a boss, right? So they have to add more to their arsenal than just turn her to stone, which I understand. The statues around the area are kind of cool, but also kind of cheesy, so I couldn't decide which way to go on that. Medusa's location in Odyssey is in the Petrified Valley of Lesbos. While the Petrified Valley is a real place, and it would make sense for Medusa to be there to create a story for the trees, Medusa's lair is actually written to be somewhere in Libya in the myth. The Petrified Forest is a result of trees constantly being unearthed during floods, earthquakes, and other things by the sort, not by Medusa. That being said as well, as I mentioned before, Pegasus was created by Medusa being decapitated. So after you defeat Medusa, that would be a much cooler way to unlock the skin for your horse instead of having to pay 750 Helix credits. You hear that, Ubisoft? Damn microtransaction bullshit. As for Medusa, I give her a 3 out of 10. Like, come on, Ubisoft. You had a perfect villain to work off of, and you completely butchered it. There are 3 Cyclops in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, each connected to their mythology. Brontes, the Thunderer, Argus, the Bright, and Steripes, the Lightning Bringer. These 3 were imprisoned in Tartarus for being abominations by Kronos, but after being released by Zeus, they betrayed their thanks by crafting lightning bolts for him. Something I found really interesting is the fact that, much like the Minotaur, they make the Cyclops in the game have these pieces of wood and other obsolete weaponry like clubs, and they're seen as kind of these muscular idiots that are just kind of stumbling and running all over the place. Instead, Cyclops were actually known to be handy metalsmiths and forged in the volcano of Etna. Argus is the only one in the volcano, though, and the others are spread out all over the map. Other than that, there actually wasn't much to say about the Cyclops in style, look, or backstory of these characters in the game. For the Cyclops, I'll give them solid 5 out of 10, because there isn't much to say about them other than what I just said. Alright, I think I covered as much as I can put in a video without making it an hour long. So with that being said, I'll rate Assassin's Creed Odyssey as a whole an 8 out of 10. Most things hold up in the textbooks versus the game, and even if they don't, Odyssey has kind of that cheat code, like I said before, of making new stories using people of the time. However, I think it is very difficult for any game or movie to be rated a 9 or even a 10. And this game definitely isn't getting it after the portrayal of the Medusa or the Cyclops. That's gonna be yikes from me. As for the gameplay itself, I'll rank that whenever I do the franchise tier list. And with that being said, thank you for letting me be your host on the Unnamed History Show, and I'll see y'all in the next one.